Do you ever have deja vu, Mrs. Lancaster?
Welcome to Chrono Conjecture, the show where we take a look at time travel in popular fiction to see if it works, or, like a zoomer trying to read an analog clock, it makes absolutely no sense. My name is Patrick, and for episode 1, we'll be going over the 1993 classic, Groundhog Day. We're starting this series off nice and simple. There shouldn't be any problems or shenanigans in this first episode.
You mean shenanigans? No.
Let's get started. Groundhog Day is just an absolute classic movie, and chances are, if you're watching this video, you've either seen it or at least know the premise. But if not, basically, Bill Murray gets stuck repeating Groundhog Day numerous times. Just too many times to count. But during that time, he develops into a better person, because he kind of starts the movie off as an asshole. The time travel in this movie is pretty straightforward. Groundhog Day features a time loop, which is when the traveler repeats a period of time for however many times it takes to break the loop. They can be caused by a time machine or some kind of outside force, but usually it's not the traveler's intention to be in the loop. They just kind of get stuck in it. The point of a time loop in fiction usually is for a character to learn from their mistakes. Like Bill does in Groundhog Day. The movie never tells us why Bill Murray gets caught in the loop, or what actually causes it to happen. It's not an important point of the film because the point is Bill becoming a better person. Obviously there's no time machine present, but it does seem like it could be supernatural. The blizzard that wasn't supposed to hit the town moves to keep Bill there, literally keeping him in one place. The song that plays every morning, I've Got You Babe, by Sonny and Cher, it's almost like saying, I've got you trapped, or I've got you here. And there's at least one scene that features clocks that are not moving. Could be an accident, could be intentional. There's definitely hints, but because the time travel isn't the focus, it's not really expanded upon further than this. There's really only two ways we can map our timeline for this one, depending on what your opinion is for how time loops work. Either they exist in a singular timeline, or they feature multiple. Either way, the traveler restarts at the beginning of the loop. Whatever happens to the traveler in the loop, they return to how they physically were at the start of the loop. The difference is they have the memories and experiences of the past loops they've taken part in. It's not like they go back as they are when they go back in time. It's more that it's their consciousness that goes back, and they're able to try again. And this is how they can learn from their mistakes. Time loops can work in a singular timeline. Each loop, the previous one gets erased like it never happened. This keeps the timeline easy to understand and doesn't give you a headache trying to draw out the possibly insane amount of branching timelines. It would look like this. Each time the loop ends, Bill's consciousness goes back in time and takes over his body. He remembers what he did the previous loop because it actually happened, but as he goes through the next loop, it overwrites what he did before. And this would happen for every loop. The final loop, whatever he does not get erased, and our timeline would continue only remembering the final loop. But time loops can also be multi-dimensional, meaning you can have multiple branching timelines. In time loops, if the traveler's consciousness goes back in time, what happens to their body? Because it doesn't go back with them, it stays at the end of the loop. It's a lifeless shell because their consciousness left to go back and inhabit their body as it was at the start of the loop. In singular timelines, it doesn't matter because the previous timeline gets erased. But if time is multi-dimensional, then that previous timeline would continue, just with the lifeless body of the traveler. With Groundhog Day, for example, the end of the first loop he falls asleep. That loop would continue as its own timeline, but Bill Murray would never wake up, because his body in that first timeline would have no one in it. His consciousness, though, would travel back in time to the start of the next loop, taking over his body at that time. Because he has memories he never had then, and because he does different things, this would cause a branching timeline, since events are different than the previous loop. So you would have timelines where he never wakes up on February 3rd, or timelines where he died during the loop. Every loop, therefore, would be its own timeline, and when the loop resets, it's just branching off from the start of the loop. The final loop, therefore, would be the one that Bill Murray continues to exist in after that period of time, and however many times the loop is reset is however many timelines were created. And yes, that sounds extremely convoluted, but it is a possible way for time loops to operate. How many loops did Bill Murray experience throughout Groundhog Day? Honestly, there's no definitive answer. It's not important for the moral of the story, and there's nothing in the movie to tell us exactly how many times the loop repeated. Initially, it's easy to keep track of what loop Bill is in, but after loop 3, it becomes anyone's guess. The first loop follows Bill just going through his day as normal. At the end of the day, the TV crew tries to leave town, but are turned around by the blizzard, forcing Bill back to the bed and breakfast. Loop 2 is also straightforward. Because the blizzard forced him back to the bed and breakfast, it's not suspicious that he woke up there. But we see him get weirded out from the sense that everything appears to be the same as the first time. This is also the loop where he breaks his pencil as a test. Him waking up and checking the pencil confirms this loop is right after, and the scenes here in loop 3 also seem to go together as Bill's panic sets in, him starting to realize that he is trapped in this time loop. Waking up on loop 4, finally realizing his situation and that anything he does ultimately doesn't matter, at this point it starts to get tricky. We see Bill kiss the innkeeper and ask if any officers were looking for him, implying this is right after loop 3. We see him punch the insurance guy and stuff his face at the diner, which we could assume to be in loop 4, but technically could be in later loops. The robbery, though, is when the count goes bust. Knowing the timing of the wind, of a dog barking, and the routines of the armored car guards, knowing exactly what they'll do when they do it, would mean Bill has studied this part of the loop extensively many times. At this point, we have no idea how many loops he's gone through. This hasn't stopped people, though, from guessing how long Bill was trapped. For example, in this video by Mosh, he estimated 12.5 years, based on the amount of time needed to do the things and learn the skills that Bill Murray does in the movie. The director himself estimated 10 years, but later changed his guess to 30 or 40. We'll never have an exact number, but based on information from what we do see, Bill Murray experienced the equivalent of, at minimum, years trapped in the loop. I hadn't watched this movie in a long time, but I knew it was considered a classic and I knew the gist of what happens. But watching it for this video, it brought up a lot of philosophical questions for me, as time travel fiction often does. What would you do if you had infinite chances to do something? What would you do if you had infinite time? What would you do if you were stuck in one place and every day was exactly the same and nothing that you did mattered? The questions that the movie presents to us and the lessons that it tries to teach us are why this movie is considered an all-time classic. It's just a simple time travel story, but with big messages. And though time travel isn't the main focus, the time travel does check out. It's a simple time loop that executes exactly like it should. But what do you think? Did I mess anything up? Or do you have a different explanation of how the time loop works in this movie? Let me know below, and thanks for